Okay, so again, I'm Rebecca, Senior EV Infrastructure Associate at the Electrification Coalition. The Electrification Coalition is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that is dedicated to driving the policies and actions that will electrify all modes of transportation to protect economic and national security, public health, and American jobs. You might have heard of our sister organizations, SAFE, which stands for Securing America's Future Energy. We are headquartered here in Washington, D.C., but we've got staff, all across the United States. In fact, our Vice President of Policy is in Prescott, Arizona, and she was super excited when I told her that I was doing this presentation earlier today. So quick landscape for what I'm going to do over the next little while is first I'm going to share one of our newest tools with everyone called the EV Funding Finder. I'll go through a little demo and show you all how it works, give you a little framework for why we created it, and then I'll sort of really dig deep into the CFI part of this presentation. And I know it was encouraged earlier, but please leave your questions in the chat and I will do my absolute best to get to as many of them as I can. And if not, then please feel free to follow up after and we'll do what we can to help. So first, the EV Funding Finder we created back in January, and it is a user-friendly tool to identify federal funding for transportation electrification. And we created the Funding Finder to really answer the question, where is the money and how do I get it? There is a ton of funding out there and it's really confusing about how to get it. We created it to capitalize on unprecedented investment in transportation electrification from the federal government, and then also to support efficient, effective, and equitable deployment of funds to reach these ambitious goals that we've set as a community. So the EV Funding Finder, which I think is definitely linked in these slides, but I'll be sure to send it in the chat. And there's a QR code coming up too. It lowers the barrier to entry to identifying and accessing funding for transportation electrification, and it shows how funding opportunities can be stacked and which alternative routes can be utilized to fund projects. And then it also shows potential uses of funding via right now fictional case studies that we're hoping to change to be maybe cities in Arizona or freight companies or something like that. Total disclaimer, we update the EV Funding Finder as we get new information. So any information that is available to the public is on the EV Funding Finder. And, we update it as we learn new things. So, as things happen, they make it there, but they're not always there, the second that EPA or DOT announces them. So these are a couple screenshots from the Funding Finder. You'll see when you first open the Funding Finder that it gives you a little bit of context similar to what I just spent the last minute and a half talking about, and you can select any of these options. So city, rural area, school, freight, EV advocate or community organization, businesses, nonprofits, individuals, or states.
It looks like we're getting some buffering, Rebecca. Maybe you would consider putting your video, just turning it off, and we might be able to hear you a little better. Maybe those are completely, oh, there we go. Are you there?
Oh no, yes, I'm here. Such a bummer. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we are now.
Awesome. I'll keep my video off, but you can imagine that I'm smiling as I'm talking about all of this. So you can start with your audience, and it will sort through a number of options, and then you'll pick the activity we call it that you're interested in. So that might be purchasing a vehicle, purchasing infrastructure, supporting planning, grids, technical assistant, workforce development. That was another moment where we said, what are all of the possible activities in all of these federal funds? We sorted them as best we could into a few different categories. And then it'll pull up this beautiful last page that on the left will have a case study. So this one is Voltland. Obviously fictional, wants to ensure that low income and disadvantaged communities have access to EV charging, and it sort of talks through the different funding options. And then on the right, it will pull up a list of federal funding options that you are in theory eligible to get. So then you click on the options and it'll pull up some more information. You'll see the example here is the Clean Heavy Duty Vehicle Program. As we get more information on all of these programs, we're putting them into the Finder and working to share that information out with everyone. So we hope that the Funding Finder helps you all identify funding. And, like I said earlier, we're hoping, number one, to turn these case studies into, real case studies. So if you want to talk about how we can do that together, we're more than happy to discuss. And we're happy to, help you as you work through the tool. The tool is an awesome first step. And we're happy to help you as you continue on. So one of the awesome funds in the Funding Finder is the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program, which is pretty much hot off the presses as of a couple weeks ago. There's a ton of information and a ton of info on the following slides. So I'm going to kind of breeze through it and then leave us a bunch of room for questions at the end. So a quick overview on, CFI generally is we of course have the bipartisan infrastructure law, which gave us NEVI, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, but then also gave us the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program, which I will from now on refer to as CFI, much less of a mouthful. And on March 14th, DOT released a notice of funding opportunity for the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program, which is $2.5 billion. Unlike NEVI funds, which are formula funds, these funds are discretionary, and they're divided between these two programs, the community program and the corridor program, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. And the information can all be found on grants.gov or on DOT's website. So I guess sort of starting big, but also small. The funding allocation timeline will be awarded over the span of 5 years. So that's until FY 2026. And for this coming year, we have a total of $700 million to award to communities. That would, totals 350 for the community charging to deploy EV charging infrastructure, hydrogen fueling infrastructure, propane fueling infrastructure, and natural gas fueling infrastructure located on public roads or in other publicly accessible locations. You can see the minimum and the maximum. And then the corridor program is the same amount. You'll notice that the corridor program, there actually is no maximum award, which is neat. And applications are due May 30th, 2023. So seemingly coming up quickly, but also for this kind of program, a nice amount of time for all of us to think about applying. So the goals of CFI, if you remember, there's the tree from the bipartisan infrastructure law and then NEVI and CFI, and the goals are to supplement, not supplant necessary private sector investment, and also to supplement NEVI fundings and existing other federal programs. We're hopeful to facilitate broad public access to a national charging and alternative fuel infrastructure network to obviously accelerate the adoption of zero emission vehicles. The program, similar to the NEVI program, is also working to implement Justice 40 objectives, lower transportation costs, and increasing economic opportunity. And of course, along with that goes advancing. Can you guys hear me again? I just got the thing. Okay, cool. I just got it. Your internet connection is not stable. So I was like, oh, they can't hear me, but good to know you can. So working to advance, job quality, workforce development, workforce equity, and then of course, as always, reducing greenhouse gas and vehicle-related emissions. So you can see here on this fun map from DOT, this is more focused on the corridor programs. I think this is a great visual of what the country really could look like as soon as all of the NEVI corridors are built out. Arizona's looking awesome down here, and I think that this is just a really promising visual of what we're in for. So I will not go over this whole table, and will just suffice to share that applications that are turned in for the community and corridor program will be considered for both. So there are certain requirements for community and certain requirements for corridor, and folks at DOT and at FHWA are focused on how can we get this money out to as many people as possible. So I know that your best interest is absolutely in mind, and you can see that the answer to all of these questions is yes. So we're looking for as many folks as possible to deploy as many public charging stations as possible. Again, not going to go over the whole thing, but some more information about the corridor program versus the community program. You'll notice that all of it has to be publicly accessible. For the corridor program, a private entity partnership is required, whereas for the community, it's optional. And you'll also notice that for location for the corridor program, which is meant to fill the gaps of these alternative fuel corridors, that they're supposed to be located as close as possible to AFCs, alternative fuel corridors, no greater than 1 mile from interstate exits or highway intersections. Whereas on the community side, they may be located on any public road or in other publicly accessible locations. So both need to be, visible and need to be easily accessible to the public. So we'll give folks maybe a second or two. And I know that these slides are being sent out. So any questions that come from these, I'm of course happy to share more. Review and selection process. I'll also, stop here to share that we are not DOT, we are not FHWA. This, content is to the best of our knowledge and, from our conversations, but we are not obviously the ones who are reviewing applications. We know that the biggest priority across the board for CFI, overall is safety, and applications must address how projects will not negatively impact the overall safety of the traveling public, and will also need to show how safety is promoted throughout the design. And then, equally as important is climate change and sustainability. The application must address how GHG emissions are reduced by the project. And also, of course, with all of these programs come Justice 40 requirements. So showing, using these Justice 40 EV charging map to conduct analysis and focusing on how 40% of the project benefits must go towards low-income, disadvantaged, or underserved communities. Moving forward, other priorities are workforce development, job quality, and wealth creation, which talks more about this on the slide. And I think it's really awesome to see programs focusing at this from a more holistic view and really prioritizing how can we support communities in addition to how can we support EV drivers. And I think these last couple lines at the bottom, the program vision, are really profound. Projects must equitably expand the deployment of public EV charging infrastructure or hydrogen and propane or natural gas fueling infrastructure in publicly accessible locations for use by the community, and must demonstrate that the application addresses one of the focus areas listed in the 7 columns above. So those were the issues that I just went over, and of course the more we can hit on, the better. Priority for projects that expand access to EV charging infrastructure within rural areas and low income and moderate income neighborhoods are obviously prioritized. The focus on the extent to which projects contribute to geographic diversity among eligible entities is of course also a focus, and there is finally a focus on the extent to which projects meet current or anticipated market demands for charging and fueling infrastructure. So I'll talk about it in a little bit, but there's a whole focus on scalability, and the Joint Office has really encouraged folks to submit scalable projects so that, if only X amount of funding is available, you're, still set and ready to go, or if they're able to award you more funding, you're able to sort of excel in this space. So some additional considerations for the corridor program are focusing on the expansion of AFCs, so filling these gaps, and also reducing congestion at charging stations in high traffic locations and meeting current and anticipated market demands. We're thinking about zero emission corridors for medium and heavy duty vehicles. So that's infrastructure connecting distribution hubs and population centers, and then connecting national freight corridors with local delivery fleets. And then finally, as we're thinking about the corridor program, it's thinking about resiliency and reliability. So how can we connect these three entities to one another? I'm not going to read through every word on this slide, because I'm sure that it's very familiar to many folks on this call. But when thinking about applications, we like to think about telling your story and scalability, being clear on timelines and implementation plans, and leveraging community engagement and educational engagement opportunities.